All black people must know this. Here is why black people were seen as a threat. Have you ever wondered why some people used to see black individuals as threats? Today we're diving deep into this question, exploring the roots of a perception that has persisted for centuries. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a journey into understanding why stereotypes exist and how they've shaped the lives of black people. So let's unravel this narrative together. Before we get into the heart of the matter, imagine stereotypes as old stories that just won't fade away. So why do these notions about black folks being threats stick around? Stick with me because we're about to unravel the layers of this complex story. Let's journey back to a time when corsets were fashion must-haves and sailing adventures captured the imagination. It's the era of powdered wigs and colonial exploits, a time when the world was both vast and perilous. In this backdrop, colonization became more than just an adventure. It was a stage where prejudices were planted, taking root in the soil of ignorance and fear. As European powers expanded their empires, they sought not only new lands but also ways to justify their actions. Stereotypes, like shadows, began to stretch and warp, casting a distorted image of the people they encountered. Picture the scene: a land far from home, inhabited by cultures rich and diverse. To justify their intrusion, colonizers needed a narrative that painted the inhabitants of something other, something threatening. Thus, the seeds of stereotypes were sown, watered by ignorance and cultivated by the arrogance of those who deemed themselves superior. As the sails billowed with the wind, so did the tales of these new lands and their people. The narrative began to take shape, one that portrayed the indigenous people, particularly those of African descent, as threats to be feared. It wasn't merely about conquering new territories. It was about conquering the minds of those back home, shaping the perceptions to rationalize the exploitation that unfolded. Let's dive into the shocking details that somehow stereotypes were more than just stories. They were deeply rooted in the past. Think of historical records like ancient scrolls telling us tales of unfair treatment. Back in the days of slavery, when chains clinked in the darkness, stereotypes weren't accidental mistakes. They were carefully made tools. As historians tell us, these tools were used to make people think black folks were dangerous, making it easier to treat them horribly. In the 15th century, the Atlantic slave trade emerged as a gruesome chapter in this tale. To justify the unthinkable brutality of enslaving millions of Africans, a narrative of dehumanization took root. The portrayal of black individuals as subhuman, inherently savage, and dangerous became a means to quiet the moral conscience of those involved in this exploitative enterprise. It was a tactic to make the unimaginable seem acceptable, an insidious strategy that allowed Europeans to reconcile their actions with a distorted sense of morality. Picture this: a plan unfolding in history to make black individuals seem threatening. It wasn't a mix-up. It was a well-thought-out story told to justify treating them unfairly. Fast forward to the colonial era, where European power sought to establish dominion over vast territories. The stereotype of black people as threats served a dual purpose. It not only justified the ruthless exploitation of African resources, but also provided a convenient excuse for the subjugation and dehumanization of entire communities. As Europeans expanded their empires, the perception of black individuals as inherently threatening became ingrained in colonial ideologies, shaping policies and attitudes for generations to come. As the transatlantic slave trade reached its peak, the stereotype of black people as threats persisted and evolved. The enslaved were not only physically shackled, but were also burdened with the weight of negative stereotypes that portrayed them as rebellious, uncontrollable, and dangerous. These stereotypes served the economic interest of the slave-owning class by fostering fear and justifying the inhumane treatment of those they exploited. The era of colonization and the request for dominance saw the entrenchment of racial hierarchies. The stereotype of black individuals as threats became a tool to legitimize the oppressive systems that denied them basic human rights. This narrative found its way into legal codes, religious doctrines, and cultural expressions, perpetrating a distorted image that would persist long after the formal abolition of slavery. Fast forward again, and the echoes of these historical stereotypes reverberate during the era of European imperialism. The imperial powers, driven by a sense of superiority rooted in centuries-old prejudices, justified their domination of African nations by portraying the colonized people as inherently dangerous and in need of civilization. This narrative not only fueled exploitation, but also laid the groundwork for enduring racial biases. Even as the world entered the 20th century and witnessed movements to decolonization and civil rights, the stereotype of black people as threats endured. The fear-inducing narrative became a tool of oppression during periods of resistance and struggle for independence. The oppressive forces, reluctant to relinquish power, relied on the threat perception to justify violence and suppression against those demanding their rightful place in the sun. These aren't just boring stats. They're clues left behind by stereotypes, showing us how they affect how people are treated. Understanding these facts isn't about looking back, it's about seeing how old stories still mess with the lives of black folks today. So as we unwrap these numbers, remember, it's not just about history. It's about facing the challenges that come from these old stories still lingering in the present. Now, let's take a stroll through a pivotal chapter in black history, the era of Jim Crow laws in the United States. Imagine this as a story with a challenging plot, where fairness and equality were elusive dreams, and black individuals faced a landscape shaped by discrimination and segregation. Picture a time not too long ago when going to school, sitting on a bus, or even enjoying a meal were governed by a set of unfair rules known as Jim Crow laws. These weren't ordinary rules. They were like invisible barriers that separated black and white folks in nearly every aspect of life. It was as if someone had drawn lines in the sand, dictating where people could go and what they could do based on the color of their skin. Unfair? Absolutely. Now, let's meet a hero in this narrative, Rosa Parks. In the everyday routine of riding a bus, she took a stand by staying seated. She refused to follow the unjust rule that demanded she give up her seat to a white person. This simple act sparked a mighty movement known as the Montgomery Bus Boycott, where black communities united to say, enough is enough. Imagine a whole community choosing to walk, share rides, and stand firm against inequality, a peaceful revolution in action. Enter Thurgood Marshall, a legal champion who believed these laws were just plain wrong. Picture him in courtrooms, passionately arguing that such laws contradicted the principles of fairness and equality. He wasn't just fighting on behalf of the law. He was fighting for the idea that everyone should be treated with respect, regardless of the color of their skin. But the impact of Jim Crow wasn't just in courts and classrooms. It played out in the everyday lives of ordinary people. Picture 9 brave black students in Arkansas, the Little Rock Nine, facing jeers and hostility just to get an education at Central High School. Their determination wasn't just about going to school. It was about challenging the harmful belief that black folks were threats to the established order. Fast forward to the historic March on Washington in 1963, where Martin Luther King Jr. stepped up to a podium and shared his dream. It wasn't a dream of flying unicorns or magic castles. It was a dream of a world where people were judged by their character, not their skin color. His words echoed like a call to action, challenging the pervasive narrative of black individuals as threats. As the Jim Crow laws crumbled, a new chapter unfolded. But here's the twist. The idea that black people were threats didn't vanish overnight. Its shadow lingered, affecting how people saw each other. So as we celebrate the end of those unfair laws, we must remember that changing a law is one thing, changing a belief takes time. In a nutshell, the Jim Crow laws were like a dark cloud in black history, casting a long shadow over the pursuit of equality. The heroes in this story, Rosa Parks, Thurgood Marshall, the Little Rock Nine, and Martin Luther King Jr., were not just challenging laws, they were challenging a harmful idea. As we look back, let's not only honor those who stood up, but also understand that changing minds is a journey, and we're still on that road today. These are not just numbers, they are reflective of the human lives impacted by stereotypes. Take, for instance, the story of Malcolm X, who despite his qualifications, faced job discrimination due to prevailing stereotypes. His experience is not isolated, but representative of a broader issue that deserves our attention. Now, it's essential to recognize that stereotypes aren't immutable. They can be challenged and changed. Initiatives like the I Am Not a Threat campaign aim to humanize Black individuals, challenging the damaging stereotypes that have persisted for so long. It's a reminder that change is possible when we confront these narratives head-on. Amidst these challenges, there are stories of resilience and community strength. Communities have come together to celebrate their diversity and challenge stereotypes. Campaigns like Black Lives Matter provide a space for dialogue, fostering understanding and dismantling harmful narratives. It's not enough to recognize the problem. We must actively work towards change. As individuals, we can question our own biases, engage in open conversations, and amplify diverse voices. It's a collective responsibility to dismantle stereotypes and create a future where no one is judged based on preconceived notions. So as we conclude this exploration, let's not forget the impact that stereotypes have on real lives. By understanding the historical context, acknowledging the present challenges, and actively participating in change, we can collectively contribute to a more inclusive and equitable society. Until next time, let's continue this dialogue and work towards a better future for all.